September 26th, 1918. 5:20 in the morning. The Meuse Argonne, France. Rain had turned the chalky soil to paste. Private First Class James Holloway, 22 years old, crouched behind his 75mm field gun, hands already numb from the cold. The barrel pointed toward the German lines, 1,200 yards distant across a landscape of mud and wire. Behind him, the largest American offensive of the war was about to begin. 47 divisions, over 1 million men, the final push to end it. But something was wrong. The fire plan called for a rolling barrage ahead of the infantry. Standard doctrine, textbook. The shells would walk forward in a precise line, infantry following 100 yards behind. Holloway's gun crew had their coordinates. They'd rehearsed the drill 100 times at Camp Upton. Elevation, deflection, load, fire. Move the barrage forward every 4 minutes exactly. Except Holloway had been watching the German trenches through a trench periscope for 3 nights running, and he'd noticed something the maps didn't show. Something the artillery officers at brigade hadn't seen from their positions 2 miles back. The German trench system didn't run in straight lines here. It bent, sharply, at an angle that meant the planned barrage would miss the communication trenches entirely. The Germans could reinforce from their reserve positions without ever coming under fire. He'd reported it, twice. The answer came back the same both times. Stick to the fire plan. The coordinates had been calculated at division level, approved by staff officers with maps and mathematics. Who was he to question it? And now, in 40 minutes, the whistles would blow. The doughboys would go over the top, and the Germans would cut them down because their reinforcements would pour forward through trenches that American shells would never touch. Holloway reached into his tunic and pulled out the sketch he'd made. Rough pencil lines showing the trench layout as he'd observed it. The bend, the junction, the communication trenches branching like veins. His sergeant was 10 yards away, coordinating with the other gun crews. The lieutenant was somewhere behind the lines, probably drinking coffee, waiting for 0 hour. No orders, no permission, no authorization. But in 38 minutes, men he'd trained with, men from Brooklyn and Pennsylvania and Ohio, were going to die because the fire plan was wrong. Holloway adjusted the elevation wheel, 2 degrees, then the deflection, 3 degrees right of the assigned coordinates, and somehow, for the next 6 minutes, one unauthorized 75mm gun was going to rewrite the American artillery doctrine for the entire Western Front. James Holloway was not born to be an artilleryman. He came from Grundy Center, Iowa, a town of 800 souls in the middle of corn country. His father, William, worked as a mechanic at the grain elevator. His mother, Sarah, took in sewing. James had 2 younger sisters. The family lived in a small house on the edge of town where the road turned to dirt. Before the war, James worked alongside his father. Not complex machines, grain augers, conveyor belts, simple engines. But William Holloway believed in precision. A 1/4 inch off, he used to say, and the whole thing binds up. Measure twice, check it 3 times, then check it again. The work was repetitive. Maintenance, mostly, greasing bearings, replacing worn belts, aligning pulleys, but it taught James to see mechanical systems as connected wholes. Change one element, and everything downstream changed with it. He was 20 when the war came to Grundy Center. April 1917. President Wilson's declaration echoed through town on a crackling radio at the general store. Within weeks, recruitment posters appeared on every wall. I want you for U.S. Army. The Draft Act passed in May. James registered on June 5th, along with every other man between 21 and 30. His number came up in July. He reported to Camp Dodge, just north of Des Moines, in August 1917. Basic training was 6 weeks of drilling, marching, and learning to shoot the M1903 Springfield rifle. He was competent, not the best shot, not the worst, just steady. When they asked for volunteers for artillery training, he raised his hand. The recruiters said they needed men who understood machines, men with mechanical experience. They shipped him to Camp Upton, New York, in October, artillery school. 6 weeks learning the 75mm field gun, the French Canon de 75 Model, 1897, the most sophisticated artillery piece in the American arsenal. The gun could fire 15 rounds per minute in expert hands. Its hydropneumatic recoil system meant the barrel returned to position automatically. No need to re-aim after each shot. Revolutionary design. But the training focused on doctrine, not innovation. Fire by the numbers. Coordinates came from forward observers or staff officers. Gunners didn't question them. They executed. Elevation. Deflection. Load. Fire. Repeat. The mathematics of trajectories, powder charges, and range tables filled thick manuals. The instructors made it clear. Artillery was a science. There was no room for improvisation. Holloway learned it all. But in his off hours, something else occupied his attention. He studied the maps. Not just the fire plans they'd been given, but the larger tactical maps showing trench systems. He noticed patterns. German trenches didn't run straight. They zigzagged. They had communication trenches, support trenches, reserve trenches, all connected like the belt system back at the grain elevator. Disrupt one point, and the whole system bound up. The other men noticed. Holloway's got his nose in maps again, they'd joke. What's the matter, Iowa? Don't trust the officers to do the thinking? His gun crew sergeant, a career Army man named Patrick O'Reilly from Boston, was less amused. Stick to the drill, Holloway. We don't need thinkers. We need loaders who can move shells fast and gunners who can follow coordinates. You start questioning the fire plan in combat, you'll get men killed. But Holloway couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with how they were being trained. The fire plans assumed German trenches were static, predictable, but every aerial photograph he saw showed them adapting, bending, changing. The war had been going on for 4 years by the time America entered. The Germans had learned. Why did American doctrine assume they hadn't? He kept his observations quiet after that, but he kept studying. They shipped overseas in March 1918. 18 days on a transport ship to Brest, France, then by rail to a quiet sector near Toul for final training with French instructors. The French were patient but firm. They'd been fighting since 1914. They'd seen tactics evolve through blood and error. They emphasized coordination. Infantry and artillery had to work as one, but they also emphasized flexibility. The plan, one French colonel told them through a translator, survives until the first shell lands. By September 1918, the American First Army was ready for its first major offensive, the Meuse-Argonne. The objective: break through the German Hindenburg Line, cut the railroad at Sedan, end the war. The German defenses were formidable. 3 trench lines, each deeper and more sophisticated than the last. Machine gun nests every 50 yards. Barbed wire so thick aerial photographs showed it as solid black lines. Behind it all, the high ground of the Argonne Forest and the heights of Montfaucon. Holloway's battery, Battery C, 149th Field Artillery Regiment, 42nd Rainbow Division, took position 2 miles behind the front line on September 24th. The offensive would begin September 26th at 5:30 a.m. The artillery preparation would start at 2:30 a.m. 3 hours of bombardment. Then a rolling barrage ahead of the infantry. The fire plan was precise. Artillery batteries received their coordinates days in advance. Elevation tables, deflection angles, timing schedules. Everything calculated at division headquarters based on aerial photographs and surveys. The plan called for Holloway's battery to fire at a sector designated Trench Line B7. Their shells would hit 400 yards ahead of the American lines, then advance at a rate of 100 yards every 4 minutes. The infantry would follow. On paper, it was flawless, but Holloway couldn't sleep the night before the offensive. He'd been assigned observation duty on September 23rd and 24th, 4-hour shifts in a forward listening post, 200 yards from the front line, watching the German positions through a trench periscope. It was routine work. Count machine gun flashes. Note patrol movements. Report anything unusual. What he noticed was the bend. The aerial photographs showed the German trenches as roughly parallel lines, but from ground level, through the periscope, Holloway could see they weren't straight. At the sector his battery would fire on, the front line trench curved sharply to the northeast, about 30 degrees off the angle shown on the maps. And the communication trenches, The ones that connected the front line to the support and reserve positions ran perpendicular to this actual angle, not the map angle. He sketched it out. If the barrage followed the coordinates given, the shells would hit the front line trench, but the communication trenches would be untouched. The Germans could move reinforcements forward continuously. The American infantry would capture the front line, but German counterattacks would come within minutes because their reserve forces would never be suppressed. He reported it to Sergeant O'Reilly on September 24th. "The maps are wrong," he said, showing his sketch. O'Reilly barely glanced at it. "The maps are from division, based on aerial photographs and survey teams. You think you know better than trained observers and staff officers? I'm just saying what I saw. What you think you saw. From 100 yards away, through a periscope, in bad light." O'Reilly handed the sketch back. "Stick to your job, Holloway. The fire plan is set. We execute it. Period." Holloway tried again on September 25th, this time approaching Lieutenant Marcus Shaw, the battery commander. Shaw was a West Point graduate, 25 years old, newly arrived from officer training. "Lieutenant, I think there's an error in the fire coordinates for Sector B7. Shaw looked up from the map table, where he was reviewing the firing schedule. "An error?" "Yes, sir. The trench system angles differently than the maps show. The communication trenches won't be hit if we follow the assigned coordinates." "Private First Class Holloway, is it?" "Yes, sir. And you have training in aerial photograph interpretation?" "No, sir." "But survey work? Cartography?" "No, sir. I just observed." "Then I suggest you trust the professionals who do have that training. The fire plan has been coordinated across 47 divisions, thousands of artillery pieces, millions of shells. Do you understand the complexity of what you're suggesting? That we should change coordinates at the last minute based on one private's observation?" "Sir, I'm just concerned that—" "Your concern is noted. Dismissed." Holloway saluted and left. But the certainty in his gut didn't leave with him. September 26th, 1918, 2:30 a.m. The bombardment began. 3,000 artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along a 20-mile front. The sound was beyond description. Not individual explosions, but a continuous roar that shook the earth and made the air itself vibrate. Holloway's crew worked in practiced rhythm. Load the shell, set the fuse, fire. The 75mm gun recoiled, returned to battery, and they repeated 15 rounds per minute when they were moving fast. For 3 hours, they pounded the German lines. The sky turned orange with muzzle flashes and exploding shells. The smell of cordite became so thick it coated everything. Holloway's ears rang despite the cotton wadding stuffed deep in the canals. His shoulder ached from loading shells. His hands blistered inside his gloves. At 5:25 a.m., the order came to shift to the rolling barrage coordinates. 5 minutes until the infantry went over. This was it. The precise fire plan. Shells would land 400 yards ahead of the American trenches, then advance. The infantry would follow in waves. Holloway's hands moved automatically, adjusting the elevation and deflection wheels to the assigned settings. But his eyes kept going to the sketch folded in his tunic pocket. Sergeant O'Reilly was shouting coordinates to the other 3 guns in the battery. The crews moved like machines, shell after shell. 4 minutes. Holloway looked toward the German lines. Dawn was breaking. Through the smoke and haze, he could just make out the white chalk excavations of the trench system, and the angle, the bend, exactly as he'd sketched it. The assigned coordinates would miss the communication trenches by 150 yards. 3 minutes. He thought about the men waiting in the American trenches, most of them younger than him. Farm boys from Iowa, like himself. Factory workers from New York, clerks from Pennsylvania. They'd been training for months. This was their first real battle. Their first time going over the top. 2 minutes. Lieutenant Shaw was at the command post, 50 yards behind the guns, coordinating with battalion. Sergeant O'Reilly was moving between the guns, checking each crew's settings. No orders. No permission. No authorization to deviate from the fire plan. 1 minute. Holloway made his decision. He adjusted the deflection wheel. 3 degrees right of the assigned coordinate. Then the elevation. 2 degrees up. The changes were small, maybe 200 yards difference in impact point. But if his calculation was right, Those 200 yards would put the shells directly on the communication trench junction he'd observed. 30 seconds. O'Reilly was at the fourth gun now, his back turned. Holloway locked the settings, loaded the next shell. His hands were steady now, completely steady. 5:30 a.m. exactly. The whistles blew all along the American line. Thousands of them. The infantry went over the top, and Holloway pulled the lanyard. The shell left the barrel with the familiar crack and recoil. The gun returned to battery automatically. He loaded again, pulled the lanyard. Again. 15 rounds per minute. The drill was automatic. His body knew it. Load. Fire. Load. Fire. But his eyes tracked the impact points. The first 3 shells landed in sequence. Through the smoke and dawn light, he saw the distinctive fountains of chalk and mud. Not on the front line trench. Deeper. About 200 yards behind it. Exactly where the communication trench should be. The 4th shell hit. Then the 5th. A secondary explosion erupted from one of the impact points. Bright orange flame followed by black smoke. He'd hit something. An ammunition dump or a dugout entrance. Maybe both. The 6th shell. The 7th. The communication trench was being methodically obliterated. Not by saturating it with shells. His gun alone couldn't do that. But by hitting the critical junction points. The places where multiple trenches intersected. Block those, and the whole system became isolated segments. It was like jamming a belt in the grain elevator back home. The whole mechanism stopped because one critical point failed. Sergeant O'Reilly noticed on the 8th round. "Holloway, your impact point is off. Check your deflection." Holloway kept loading. "Deflection is correct, Sergeant." "The hell it is! You're 200 yards right of the assigned coordinate." O'Reilly started toward the gun. But at that moment, runners began arriving from the front. 3 of them, breathless, covered in mud. "Forward observers report German reinforcements are not reaching the front line," one gasped. "Their communication trenches are cut. Request continue current fire." Another. "Machine gun nest at junction B7C is destroyed. Infantry advancing ahead of schedule." The third. "Second wave reports minimal counterattack. German reserves can't move forward." O'Reilly stared at them, then at Holloway, then at the impact points visible through the smoke. Lieutenant Shaw arrived at a run, his map case bouncing against his hip. "What's happening?" "I'm getting reports of off-target fire from this battery." "Sir, the fire is not off-target," O'Reilly said slowly. "It's hitting exactly where it needs to." Shaw looked at the forward observer reports, then at the German lines. The American infantry was visible now, gray-clad figures moving through the wire, across no man's land. Meeting resistance, but not the overwhelming counterattacks that doctrine predicted. Because the German reserves couldn't reach the front, the communication trenches were blocked, collapsed, on fire. Shaw turned to Holloway. "Did you adjust the coordinates?" "Yes, sir." "On whose authority?" "My own, sir." "No authority." "I observed the trench layout from a forward position. The assigned coordinates would have missed the communication trenches, so I adjusted." Shaw should have relieved him, should have ordered him to reset to the assigned coordinates immediately. Instead, he unfolded his map, looked at Holloway's sketch, and then at the destruction visible ahead. "How many degrees did you adjust?" 3 degrees deflection right. 2 degrees elevation increase. Shaw did the mathematics in his head. "That puts you directly on the communication trench junctions." "Yes, sir." "And the other guns in the battery are still firing on the assigned coordinates?" "Yes, sir." "Just mine deviated." Shaw looked at the forward observer reports again. At the smoke rising from multiple points along the German line. At the American infantry advancing with losses far lower than predicted. "Continue current fire," Shaw said. "And someone get me a runner to battalion. Tell them Battery C has adjusted coordinates based on forward observation and is achieving superior results. Request permission to adjust remaining guns to match." The runners sprinted off. Holloway kept firing. His 16th shell, 17th, 18th. Each one landed within 50 yards of his aim point. The communication trench junction was now a crater field. Smoke poured from multiple points. German soldiers were visible retreating from the front line, but they had nowhere to go. Their escape routes were gone. By 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes into the attack, the American 167th Infantry Regiment had captured the first trench line with half the expected casualties. The Germans couldn't counterattack effectively because their reinforcement system was destroyed. By 6 a.m., Battalion had authorized Battery C to continue the adjusted fire and had requested other batteries adopt similar targeting based on forward observation rather than pre-planned coordinates. By 6:30 a.m., the entire fire plan for the sector was being revised in real time. Holloway fired 127 rounds that morning. His shoulder was a mass of bruises from loading. His hands bled through his gloves. The barrel of the 75mm gun grew so hot they had to pour water on it to prevent warping. But the gun kept firing. At 8 a.m., Lieutenant Shaw ordered a ceasefire for his battery. The German position was taken. The infantry was consolidating. No more targets in range. Holloway's ears rang so loud he couldn't hear normal conversation. His vision blurred from exhaustion. He sat down heavily on an ammunition crate, unable to stand. The gun crew said nothing. They just stared at the smoking barrel, at the expended shell casings piled around the position, at the transformed landscape ahead where American flags now flew from German trenches. Sergeant O'Reilly approached, canteen in hand. He offered it to Holloway. "Iowa," he said. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest. I can't decide which." Holloway drank. The water tasted like cordite and mud. Did it work? Did it work? You destroyed an entire trench system's logistics with one gun. You did more damage in 30 minutes than the rest of the battery did in 3 hours. O'Reilly shook his head. "If you'd been wrong, I'd be putting you on charges for unauthorized deviation from fire plan. Since you were right, you'll probably get a medal." "I don't want a medal, Sergeant. I just wanted them to make it across." O'Reilly looked toward the captured German trenches. They made it. A lot more of them than should have, given what we were facing. By noon, forward survey teams had reached the captured German positions and confirmed what Holloway had seen. The communication trenches had indeed run at an angle not reflected in the aerial photographs. The pre-planned fire coordinates would have missed them entirely. Holloway's unauthorized adjustment had hit the critical junction points precisely. The after-action assessment noted that casualties in the 167th Infantry Regiment's sector were 40% lower than projected. The German counterattack expected within 2 hours never materialized because reinforcements couldn't move forward. The success allowed American forces to advance faster than planned, capturing the second trench line by afternoon. On September 28th, Holloway was summoned to division headquarters. He expected charges. Unauthorized deviation from fire plan was serious. In some circumstances, it could be considered insubordination. Instead, he found himself standing before Major General Charles Menaher, commander of the 42nd Division. "Private First Class Holloway," Menaher said, "I've reviewed Lieutenant Shaw's report and the forward observer assessments. You adjusted your gun's coordinates without orders during a coordinated barrage involving thousands of artillery pieces." "Yes, sir." "Why?" "The assigned coordinates were based on aerial photographs that didn't show the actual trench layout, sir. I'd observed the position from a forward listening post. I could see the communication trenches would be missed." "And you decided you knew better than the division artillery staff?" Holloway hesitated. "Not better, sir. Just different information. They were working from photographs taken at altitude. I was looking at ground level. Both views are true, but they showed different things." Menaher was quiet for a long moment. Then he unfolded a map. "Show me exactly what you observed." Holloway spent 20 minutes describing the trench layout as he'd seen it, the junction points, the angles. Menaher asked detailed questions. A colonel from the artillery staff took notes. When Holloway finished, Menaher said, "You're from Iowa?" "Yes, sir." "Grundy Center." "What did you do before the war?" "Worked with my father, sir. Grain elevator mechanic." "Not an engineer? No college?" "No, sir. Just farm machinery." Menaher exchanged glances with the artillery colonel. "Private First Class Holloway, what you did was technically a violation of fire discipline. You deviated from assigned coordinates without authorization. That's serious." Holloway's stomach dropped. "Yes, sir. However, your deviation was based on superior tactical observation and resulted in significant success. More importantly, it reveals a critical flaw in our current artillery doctrine. We're relying too heavily on pre-planned fires based on aerial reconnaissance. We're not adapting in real time based on ground-level observation. Menoher paused. I'm promoting you to corporal, and I'm assigning you to division artillery staff to work with forward observation teams. Your job will be to teach other observers how to identify these kinds of discrepancies and communicate them rapidly to gun batteries. Lieutenant Shaw tells me you sketch well. You'll prepare visual guides for recognizing trench system vulnerabilities that aerial photographs miss. Sir, I'm just a gunner. I don't know how to teach. You know how to see what's actually there instead of what's supposed to be there. That's rarer than you think, Corporal. Dismissed. Holloway saluted and left, dazed. The promotion came through on October 1st. But, more significantly, his unauthorized fire adjustment was studied by artillery officers throughout First Army. The recognition that ground-level observation could provide critical targeting data that aerial reconnaissance missed became incorporated into revised artillery procedures. The formal term was dynamic fire adjustment based on forward observer real-time assessment, a fancy phrase for what Holloway had simply called looking at what's actually there. By October 1918, artillery procedures included protocols for forward observers to rapidly communicate trench layout discrepancies to gun batteries, with authority for battery commanders to adjust coordinates in real time rather than waiting for division-level approval. The Meuse-Argonne offensive continued until November 11th, 1918. Holloway spent it training forward observers and reviewing aerial photographs against ground reports. He identified 17 more instances where pre-planned coordinates would have missed critical German positions. Each correction saved lives. When the armistice came on November 11th at 11 a.m., Holloway was at an observation post 2 miles from the front. The guns fell silent. After 4 years of continuous noise, the Western Front went quiet. Men emerged from trenches and bunkers, stunned by the sudden absence of sound. Holloway returned to Grundy Center in April 1919. He was 23 years old. He married Catherine Miller, a girl he'd known since childhood, in June. They bought a small house on the same street where he'd grown up. He returned to work at the grain elevator with his father, maintaining the same machinery he'd worked on before the war. He didn't talk about France. When asked, he would say only, "I did artillery. We shot at coordinates." Catherine learned not to press. Like so many veterans, the war was something he carried quietly, a weight that didn't need words. He received the Distinguished Service Cross in the mail in 1920. The citation mentioned extraordinary heroism in action and initiative resulting in significant tactical success. He put the medal in a wooden box in the attic and never displayed it. In 1921, he and Catherine had their first child, a daughter named Margaret. 2 more children followed, William in 1923, Sarah in 1925. He taught his son the same thing his father had taught him. Measure twice, check 3 times. Precision matters. The Depression hit Grundy Center hard. The elevator closed in 1931. Holloway found work as a general mechanic, fixing whatever people brought him: cars, tractors, household appliances. The pay was irregular, but he made it work. He passed away in 1954 at age 58. Heart attack, quick and sudden. His obituary in the Grundy Center Register ran 4 lines. James W. Holloway, 58, mechanic, died Tuesday. Survived by wife Catherine, children Margaret, William, and Sarah. Veteran of World War I. Services Friday at Methodist Church. His name is on the Grundy County War Memorial, one of 127 names from that small community. Most people walk past without pausing. The memorial itself is a simple granite stone in the courthouse square. But at the U.S. Army Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, there's a display case in the museum. Inside is a training manual dated 1919, Forward Observer Procedures for Dynamic Fire Adjustment. The introduction, written by an artillery colonel, notes, "These procedures were developed based on innovations first employed by Corporal James Holloway during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. His recognition that ground-level observation could provide targeting data superior to pre-planned coordinates saved numerous lives and significantly improved artillery effectiveness." Few visitors read the small text, But every artillery officer trained at Fort Sill studies the principle Holloway discovered. Don't just follow the plan. Look at what's actually there. There's a temptation to think that modern warfare is all about grand strategy and overwhelming force, that battles are won by superior numbers, better equipment, more firepower. And yes, those things matter, but the truth is that wars are also decided by men like James Holloway, men who understand that precision matters, that a small adjustment at the right moment can change everything, that sometimes you have to trust what you see over what you're told to see. Holloway didn't win the war. The Meuse-Argonne offensive involved 1.2 million American soldiers, thousands of guns, years of Allied effort. His contribution was tiny in that context. But in one sector, on one morning, he saved lives, dozens, maybe hundreds, because he had the clarity to see what was actually there and the courage to act on that clarity without permission. He was a mechanic from Iowa who understood that systems only work when every component is properly aligned. And on September 26, 1918, he aligned one gun's coordinates to the reality on the ground instead of the plan on the map. In a war that consumed millions, sometimes that kind of precision, the willingness to trust observation over doctrine, to act without orders when action was necessary, made all the difference. What would you have done in Holloway's position? When every regulation said follow the plan, but your observation said the plan was wrong? Would you have adjusted those coordinates without permission? What strikes you most about this story? The technical innovation, the moral courage to break the rules, or the quiet humility of his return? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe forgotten heroes like James Holloway deserve to be remembered, men who changed military doctrine without seeking glory, who saw what needed to be done and simply did it, share this with someone who understands that sometimes the bravest act is trusting your own eyes. Because sometimes the difference between catastrophe and success is one man with the courage to adjust the aim point, even when every voice of authority says not to.